activities of the project into the calculating the costs of your project. The first, there are actually 5 steps in preparing the budget. First, it's advisable that you identify the various types of costs in your project, be it, let's say, and I will give you some examples later on, what are the cost items, but if you can remember an example that I have presented last time, the restoration of the castle, and I will talk a lot about the restoration of the castle, and will use this example again. The activities in the training, in the job training, can be, and the cost items can be the construction materials, because when restoring the castle, you need some construction materials. Then you have to have some labor force, trainers, training materials, and so on. So these are the cost items. So you use the list of the activities in your project, and you imagine implementing the project, and by imagining implementing your project, you write the list of things that you need to implement the project, materials. You may buy services, catering, transportation, whatever, but also you need people's time, and you have to pay for people's time. So you can have various types or categories of items that you just identify in detail. That's the first step. The second step is that you should quantify the items, the cost items that you have already identified, and calculate the amounts of the construction materials and types of construction materials, the amounts of people's time for various tasks people will do during the project, etc. So you do not, at this moment, in the second step, you do not calculate actually the money. You calculate the number of cost items. And only in the third step, you estimate the costs per unit of the item, and only then you calculate expenditures by multiplying the quantified cost items by unit cost of the item, and you've got expenditures or costs of your project per item category. And only after you've got this, then you start reading the budget template in detail, and reorganize your calculations into the budget template, because various donors do have different budget templates, and although it is advisable to get familiar with the budget template in advance, the real filling in the budget templates is better once you know how much your project will cost and what will be your expenditures, before you try to structure them into the budget template. So that's why I'm going to lead you in a very, very simplified way through the budgeting process. And only in the end, I'll show you the budget template, or various budget templates actually, out of which one is the budget template that the project have prepared for our exercise, for our joint exercise. So next. Okay, remember the example from the last time. I will repeat it quickly, and please bear in mind that this is a stylized, very simplified, illustrative information about the budget. The real implementation of the castle restoration project was much more complicated. But for the training purposes, I have simplified it so that we can do it within, let's say, 20 minutes, go through the budgeting process. So the castle, the name of the castle is Castle Uhrovec. It's in Slovakia. It's a real castle, standing about 3-4 kilometers from the small village of Uhrovec. And the castle restoration is a training process. And it's kind of on-the-job training, meaning that the people who own the castle prepared a training project and acquired a number of trainees to be trained, taught on the job by restoring the castle in the construction skills, construction crafts, and various kinds, so that they can use these skills or crafts not only in restoring the castle, but also on the regular job market. So they promised to the funding body, and the funding body was European Social Fund, one of the structural funds at that time, money provided by European Union. Yes, it's a good point. Будь ласка, зробіть презентацію on the whole screen, if you can. Alexandra, it would help. It's too small at the moment.
Yeah, sure.
And so they promised, the people owning the castle Uhrovec, they promised to train 90 people in several rounds of training. For each round, there will be 30 people trained. And there are several training subjects, which you can read on the slide. And for the first round, they've selected 30 people, and they focused only on masonry and carpentry because other crafts were not necessary at the first restoration efforts. So they decided to train people only in masonry and carpentry. And each on-the-job training or learning by doing training would take about 800 hours. It's just quite a lot. It's 5 months. 5 months training. Part of it is real training, but a lot of this is training by doing the actual restoration work on the castle. So the training is on the site. And it consists of lectures, 24 hours lectures a month. Then, when on the lectures, the trainers explain and teach people how to do the masonry and carpentry. Then, the practical training with mentoring by expert craftsmen, 4 hours a month. Again, this is very strong, intensive training when the master craftsmen train people individually and teach them to do the work properly. And then about 104 hours a month on-the-job training, practical one, where the people, the trainees, actually restore the castle, and then they are supervised by assistant craftsmen, people who lead them, mentor them during the whole work, but the trainees do a lot of work by themselves. So that's a summary of the project and how the budget for this may look like. Okay. So the cost item identification means that they had to split the training into several parts. So first, if you want to train people, you need training materials. In this particular case, training materials for masonry. Then, once you've got the training materials, you need masonry tools for the trainees and various masonry equipment for the trainees. You have to buy it as a part of the project. Then, because it is on-the-job training, people have to get construction material for training, stones, bricks, cement, sand, lime, whatever, and the same in much larger quantities, construction material for restoration, for the work people will do during those 104 hours a month in the on-the-job training. Then you have to pay trainers, both the master trainers and assistant trainers, who would teach the trainees, and assistant trainers who would assist and mentor the trainees during the training. And you also need a catering and transportation. So you can see on this slide typical cost items of the training project. And this is just one round of the training project. What else you need? At this moment, in the second step, you try to estimate what the cost items actually cost. What will be the unit costs for the cost items? Training materials for masonry. You need a trainer's time, which is €12 per hour of total personal costs, including taxes and social taxes and whatever. And it may seem it's a very small amount, but in fact, we talk about a project which is almost 20 years old, and European Social Fund, like many other donors programs or funds, do have quite often a ceiling of which money they are willing to pay for personal costs. And at this time, when this project started, the ceiling for the expert master trainers was €12 an hour for Slovakia. Then printing is about €20 per one set of training materials, and then you need a blackboard or flip chart, papers, pens, whatever, and you just guess it's about €150 altogether. Then you need the masonry tools, so you split the masonry tools in the small cost items, hammers, chisels, mason's gloves, other equipment, and you attach a price tag for each masonry tool and calculate it all together, sets of tools for masons for 30 people. So again, you got roughly one price for one set of masonry tools as of €50. And the same you do for the equipment, construction materials, and other cost items that have been identified before. And now, as soon as you've got cost items identified, then let me move it here. Then you try to calculate the expenditures for the whole training round. So the training materials for masonry, and there is a detailed description of how the calculation works. So you need two trainers paid 12 hours, €12 per hour, and multiply by 250 hours for training materials for each trainer. So in the end, you know that just the preparation of training materials will cost you €6,000. Then the printing will cost you 30 sets of training materials, €20 per each set, so it's €600, and so on and so on. So for each category of cost items, you calculate the total costs per cost item that you need for the training. And as soon as you do this, and again, here we are, you try to calculate the expenditures for all the categories, and you put the categories together in much broader categories, meaning that you calculate all the personal costs per type of person which will be participating in the project. So the trainers will cost you 6,000 euro for preparation of training materials, and then they will cost you 7,680 euro for actually delivering the training to the trainees. Assistant trainers will cost you 14,400 euro for training delivery, for assisting the trainees and guiding them through the whole training round. So the subtotal personal costs are costs of the trainers and assistant trainers. Then the material costs, flip charts and accessories, masonry tools, construction materials, equipment, and again you calculate a subtotal for the material costs, which will be 5,250 euro plus something which we haven't calculated in this short example, but in reality you have to calculate all the materials and put it together. And the same you calculate for the services such as printing, because people will be actually working on the construction site. You have to insure the trainees so that in case some injury occurs, they are insured. And something like a catering, transportation, all these services you put together and get a subtotal for the services, and then putting together the subtotals for personal costs, materials, services, you get total costs of the training, one training round only, and that's the input into the budget. So there we are. So as soon as you know the costs of one training round, you start filling it in a table which may help you to divide it into various categories which you will use then to move into the real budget template which will be provided to you in our exercise case by ourselves, but in a real project by the call for proposals or by donors rules. So in this table that you can see, there is a line for the masonry course, which was the subject of my example, but the same you do for the carpentry course, and then you've got subtotal for the round 1 of the training, and the same you will repeat for round 2 and round 3, because as you remember at the beginning I said that the people running this project were promised that they will do 3 rounds of trainings, each round per 30 people, and each training will take 5 months. So the whole 3 rounds will take about 1.5 years. So this table allows you to distinguish between various types of courses, but at the same time in the columns you can distinguish between the personal costs, material costs, services, and others. And it's really very, very simple, and quite often these tables may be much more complicated depending on the type of project you are developing or you are writing about. On another slide now, you can see some other example. No, not yet. This, yes. You may see another example which may help you to structure your costs or expenditures in a slightly different way. So you can divide your project into the activities and tasks as has been recommended last time during the last training. And then you calculate people's time for task overhead, meaning that these are, let's say, the company expenditures or the city hall expenditures to run the city hall. So the people's time is not only the actual money that you pay them, but this is also some additional money that cost you to have the people, like the offices, heating, equipment, whatever people use. Then you can have a people services, service contracts. You may buy materials or goods for your training. You may have a works contracts, and again, such kind of table enables you to structure your costs or expenditures into different categories so that you can plan it more easily, and you know where you are when implementing the project. And make sure, and that's rather important, these tables help you to make sure that you have not omitted anything, because as you will hear in the end, it is your responsibility as a project applicant to include all the costs of the project, because by getting the money from the donor, you promise that you deliver outputs and results. And if you omit any money in your budget, then you have to pay them anyhow by yourself from your own funds, because you will have received money for delivering the outputs that you are obliged to deliver, and any omission of any expenditures or costs is your risk, and donor doesn't care about it. Pytania. So another table which may help you is just a different table of a budget. This is a very simplified generic budget, and this is something which is close to the budget template which we will share with you, and you will be obliged to fill in when describing, drafting your project. So you can see again here in this table the personal expenditures, travel, catering, daily allowances, equipment, office costs, various services like I don't know, transportation, printing maybe. There may also be construction works in your projects, like it used to be in the project which we supported 2 years ago, I think, in Ukraine, and something direct support. And that's another action point at this moment. You are obliged, and you should, for your safety, to distinguish between eligible expenditures and non-eligible expenditures, because usually in donors' descriptions of the project or calls for proposals, the donors describe what kind of expenditures or costs they are ready to pay for, and what kind of expenditures or costs they will not pay for. So these are the expenditures that won't be covered by the donors' money are non-eligible expenditures, but quite often for your project you have to bear these non-eligible expenditures anyhow, because they are necessary for completion of your project. And that's why you are, particularly in European funds, to describe and distinguish between eligible and non-eligible expenditures. And the reason for that is that you should, by doing this, you should prove to the donors, assessors who assess your project, then you have included all the expenditures, notwithstanding whether they are eligible or not eligible, so that your outputs and results you promise to deliver are really achievable, attainable by the donor's money. So you should prove that you have got enough money to cover non-eligible expenditures should such kind of expenditures arise. And there is another table which is an old one, and probably currently the tables are different ones. But again, it's another split of financing of your project into different categories, showing eligible and non-eligible expenditures, and the eligible expenditures distinguished according to the source of money, and the same for non-eligible expenditures. So you may get some money to cover your expenditures from the EU resources or donors sources, then from the national sources, state budget sources, from the regional budgets, and you may also get some money from the private sources, either as a sort of private co-financing, or for some activities you can levy some fee, so you've got some income into your project. And again, this table shows the structure of the budget according to the sources of your funding. And it's quite good if you know in advance for yourself safety, that all these sources you rely on are really committed. So you've got someone committed to pay the money that are not under your control. There's someone promised to pay you the money which you need for your project. So that's the basics of how to go through the budgeting, and it was in a simplified manner. And there were some questions which I'll try to answer. Oh, I'm afraid my Ukrainian is not so fluent. Okay, it's mostly about presentations. Okay. Питання до Яна. Підкажіть, як вірно в бюджеті вказати можливий ризик щодо курсової. Okay. I will answer this question in the end. I've got several answers to your questions that you've put in advance, so I will deal with it. And basically, the risks of the exchange rate are either borne by yourself, it's most time, and sometimes you can persuade donors that you've got the project in donors' currency, in US dollars or in euros. But it's very rare, actually. Usually donors insist, in my experience, and maybe Sander or Dmitro will have different experience, that the donors insist in having grants in the local currencies. So if you've got grant in local currency, the exchange rate risk is actually on the side of the donor, but your risk is the inflation and increase of prices, and vice versa. But I will talk a little bit more about it in several minutes. Now, let's go through the budget which you will receive, or maybe you have already received it. This is the basic structure of the budget that you will fill in your project. So we ask you to provide information about the personal costs all your stuff, whatever kind of stuff you need. Divide it into categories in the basic or stuff necessary for the project, who will deliver the project activities, and then dodatkový personnel, supporting stuff, I would call it. So you may add more categories. It's up to you, actually. You needn't stick to just 2 categories which are prescribed here, but you should describe and calculate the costs of the project at least in these 2 categories. Then another broad part of the budget is the costs or expenditures of various activities in your project that you are to organize, events, for example, or construction of something, or providing some services to someone. So what is called here event, podia, it needn't be event only. It may be some output you deliver, and you need some kind of expenditures for this. So again, we show just 3 events here, but in fact you may add more events if necessary according to the nature of your project. And the third category is other direct costs or expenditures, where you put every direct costs which you cannot put into the previous categories. Now I'm going to show you more detailed examples of structure of the budget with an example. So this is the structure of the budget which you are going to fill in, hopefully, for the personal costs. The kilkist, I don't know how to say it in English, is the amount in percentage. It means that if you have a person here as a kind of elementary staff of the project, scarcely people work 100% of their time for the project. So here you put the proportion of their time they will spend for the project. So you will see it, an example later on. Then these are the units of the measurement of this amount of time, and now the same for the number of days. So here you for people you put here the proportion of their working time they will be working on the project. For example, I'm a teacher at that's not the example from the project, but I'm a teacher at the university, and I've got a permanent job at the university, but I work for the university only about 15% of my time, or 12% of my time. And the rest of my work is for Civita company. So in my case here would be, in the case of my working for the university, only 12%, because 12% of my working time is teaching at the university, which is roughly one day a week, but not all the months of university works. Here now is the unit cost and total cost. Unit cost per person and total cost per person, given the number of days and proportion of his involvement. So, an example. This is the example of the real project. The real project which happened, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 5 years ago in Ukraine. And this was a project in which several strategies were to be delivered to municipalities by analytics and strategic advisors and facilitators. And afterwards, after these strategies have been delivered, then 12 municipalities gathered together to a kind of municipal forum to exchange their experience, knowledge, strategies, project experience, and so on and so on. So this is the extract, the minor part of the project, just as an example, so that you can see on a real case how to fill in the table. So for the project, there was a project manager, 56.3% of his time, which was 284 days altogether during 2 years of the project. And the unit cost per day was 100 euro. So the total cost of the project manager was 28,400 euro. And the same for the senior analyst, 2 junior analysts, and again, the proportion of their working time they were supposed to spend on the project, and the number of days in the span of 2 years, and their daily costs per day, so the daily costs, and the total costs of the junior analyst for the whole project. And altogether, the basic personnel, basic staff of the project was 75,330 euro. And the same for other personal costs. So the total personal expenditures or costs for the project were 87,188 euro. So the second part of your budget will be the expenditures that are not personal ones, but are related to the project implementation. In this case, it's upon you which categories you decide depending on the type of project that you deliver. And again, you are required to provide information about the amounts and the units. Mostly, you will not be required to fill in these 2 parts of the table, and you will start filling it only from here, because there won't be no proportions in this column. So you'll start filling it here, and again, unit costs and total costs per activity. To show you an example, so that it's clear what we mean by this, is this. You see, the first type of the activity of the project example, these 12 strategies for 12 municipalities, and then the joint forum of 12 municipalities. The first type of activity was the 2-day strategic sessions in each rayon. So you need transport costs, you need catering, maybe daily allowances, I don't know, and you need some other materials for that. You need to hire, you may need to hire the rooms as well, and you need printing materials and things like that. And again, this is for personal costs for 4 people, and now these are numbers which are calculated for all the people for all 12 rayons, and calculation unit costs and costs together for each activity. And similarly, the forum of municipalities or rayons at the end, hire of the conference rooms, coffee breaks, catering, and so on and so on. And there is no unit costs in this part. There are just 2 unit costs in this part, and then again calculation of the unit costs and the total costs per task or activity or cost item, and the total or subtotal for the category of the basic project activities apart from personal costs. Third part of the budget, other direct costs, and again the same structure depends on what kind of other direct costs you have and the total costs of the whole project, summing up all the subtotals. Again, the example, this is the bank loan or interest on the bank loan, which is eligible expenditure. So you get money from the donor to cover 0.3% of the bank loan. Yeah, and the visibility, I think, yes, visibility or something like that, marketing materials for the project. So these are direct costs not associated with individual activity of the project, but associated with the project as a whole. And these other direct costs are put in this part of the project. Any questions concerning the budget structure? Everything's clear, everybody's ready to start filling in their project information into this structure. Yes? No questions, very good. Now, I would like to briefly take you through the cash flow estimation. Whatever is the type of grant you receive, you should, for your own safety, calculate the cash flow estimation. You may get the money for your project in advance, which you usually get in grants. In my experience, you usually get from donors money in advance, but the money go in installments. Meaning that you don't get the whole sum of the project money at the beginning, but you get it, let's say, quarterly or every few months or twice or 3 times a year against the proof that you have spent your money properly and according to the rules. So you have to declare spending the money from the previous installment in order to get another installment. That's the basic idea. But in my experience, and I don't know what's the situation in Ukraine, and please, Dmitro, comment on this if you can, but in my experience, the installments, whatever are the promises of the donors, may be delayed. Sometimes may be delayed quite a lot, but you mustn't stop implementing your project just because the money from the donor, the installment, was delayed. So you have to calculate the cash flow of your project, meaning that you have to make sure that you will have enough money to cover your expenditures every month whenever you get the funding from the donor. Meaning, and that's a key issue, that you have to get some information about the behavior of the donor in advance to know whether and how much installments may be delayed in a particular case of a particular donor. Because donors, European Union quite often promise something in the call for proposals, but the reality may differ, and the cash flow is made taking into account the reality, not the promises only. So it is advisable that you ask someone who already got money from the same donor whether the installments are delayed, and if so, how long, so that you can roughly estimate your cash flow taking into account those possible delays. So what is a cash flow? It's a calculation of the money you get or you have and expenditures you have to have every month, or usually every month, and it's a balance of this money. So how you do it? You start with the Gantt chart, which I've suggested last time, that you fill in. Looks like this, and in the Gantt chart you should see all the activities or tasks per output. And because in the previous budgeting exercise I have just described, you have all the activities described in financial terms. You know how much each activity will cost you. And since in the Gantt chart you know how much of the activity you will carry on every month, you can calculate the amount of money you need per activity per month. So that's the first part of the cash flow calculation. It's an Excel exercise. So, and this is an example of another project which used to be a construction project in which something was constructed, and there are 3 activities at the moment. There are more, but for this example there are 3 activities. The selection of supplier, the public procurement and things associated with public procurement, which costs some money. Then the real construction. You see, you do not pay the construction company every month, but you pay the construction company every 2 months, and you need to manage the project. So that's the third line, the project management. And you pay for the project management, for the project manager and supporting staff and whatever. You pay 15 units of something every month. So you, in the end, calculate the total expenditure per month. And you see the total expenditure per month 1, 35 units. For the second month, 35 units. The third month, you pay for the real construction, so it's 515 units, etc., until month 9. And against this, you put the money you receive from the donor. So at the beginning of the project, before you start doing anything, you receive 100 units, something, 150 money, and you receive out of this, the first month, you spend only 35, so you will end up with 115 money at the end of the month 1. The second month, you spend 35 money, but you get no money from the donor, so you spend 35 money, and you end up with 80 money at the end of month number 2. At the month number 3, you receive 450 money and you spend 515, but you still have 800 money or 80 money from the previous month. So in the end, you've got still 15 money credit. And you do it the same until the end of the project. And it seems okay, because even if you spend more in some months than you actually get, you still have mostly some money remaining from the previous month, with the exception of the month 8. In the 8 months, you get 15 money minus, so you don't have 15 money to cover your expenses. What do? You either pay the money from your own budget, if you've got enough money in your own budget outside of your project, or if you don't have enough money outside of your project, you have to have a bank loan, because you cannot afford to stop paying people. So you have to get the money this month from somewhere to cover the project expenditures, because you don't have enough money from the donor in the 8 months. And this particular case is the main reason why you need to calculate a cash flow to make sure that you have got enough money from donors to cover all your expenses, or if you don't have enough money from donors to cover your expenses, that you know how much money you will need from some other resources, either from the bank loan or from some other resources. And the importance of this is that in some major project about 10 years ago or 12 years ago in Romania, we have calculated the cash flow for the business projects that were submitted by businessmen and businessmen who applied for grants from the European Union. And in the end, several businessmen decided that it will be cheaper for them to get the loan from the bank than to get the grant from the European Union. Because the risks and expenditures and the bureaucracy associated with running the project financed by the European Union were so big that the interest on loan they would get from the bank were actually cheaper. So in the end, as a result of our 6 months exercise with the businessmen decided they do not want to get European money because it's too costly, and they decided to get the loan from the bank, and in the end they got it, because they had very well prepared project with all the calculations, all the budgets. So they just, instead of applying for the European money, they just took the same information, redrafted them, restructured them as an application for the loan, and quite easily received the loan from the bank. So that's why I would recommend to calculate the cash flow. Maybe a last story concerning calculating a cash flow, which is a real one from Czech Republic. About 15 years ago, when we started implementing European funds in the Czech Republic on a large scale, a guy who was director of an NGO supporting involvement of vulnerable people into the labor market. So they had an excellent program of getting people who were outside the socially disadvantaged, vulnerable, whatever, they had an excellent program to get them into the market, labor market, and to provide them with the training skills so they got a permanent job, quite often quite a good paid permanent job. But they tried to fund these training courses from the European Social Fund, and because of the Czech bureaucracy and delays, in the end, the guy who was director of this NGO had to put his own house as a collateral to the bank to get the bank loan to be able to run the training project, because the delay of tranches of installments from the European Social Fund administration in Czechia was so huge that they would be forced to stop the training, which first he mustn't do because he had obligation to the administration to run the training, whatever delays with the money, and the money was spent. He doesn't have any money of his own. He doesn't have any money in the NGO, but the training had to continue. The show had to go on. And therefore, he had to get the bank loan, and to get the bank loan, he used his own house as a collateral. In the end, the story ended up successfully. Everything was paid from the European Social Fund, and he was able to repay the bank loan to the bank, and everything was okay. But really, his experience over about 8 or 10 months, when he wasn't sure when he will get the money from the European Social Fund, was very, very frustrating. So you should calculate the cash flow, and you should calculate the cash flow using the real periods when the donor is expected to give you the money, not according to the promises written somewhere, but based according to the real experience. That's important. And now, the final thing from me, you have asked several questions, and these are the answers. First, I've already talked about it. It is an applicant's responsibility to identify all the expenses. Unforeseen or unidentified expenses will be borne by the applicant in all cases, meaning that if you, during project implementation, you find that you have forgotten something, or should any unexpected expenses arise, which you couldn't plan for, you still are obliged to pay for them, because you are obliged to deliver the outputs to the donor and to do what you promised to donor for the money the donor gives you. And to do so, and the money from the donor are finite. You cannot get more money from the donor. So everything that you cannot plan for in advance, you pay by yourself. That's the general rule. There may be differences, there may be exceptions, but I have never heard about them. Concerning the exchange rate, usually donors prefer to provide grants and sign the grant agreement with in the local currency, in Ukrainian hryvnias. But sometimes it is possible to negotiate the budget in donors' currency, in euros or dollars, which is advisable if it can be done, particularly in very uncertain times, as these times are. But in the end, you either accept what the donors offer, or you don't apply if you don't accept it. because in this case, the donor set up the rules and you just adjust to them. Another case, another questions was concerning what are eligible and non-eligible expenditures. It is stipulated in the call for proposals, or sometimes in the call for proposals and also in some programming document. That's the case of the European funds usually. There is a programming document stipulating what kind of expenditures can be covered, and then more details are stipulated in the call for proposals. And they differ among donors. Each donor may have different eligible expenditures. So the eligibility check for you is that after you've got all the cost items identified, probably even before calculation of the real expenditures, just when you identify all the cost items, you check whether the cost items are eligible to be paid by the donors' rules. So if you find out that quite large sums of your cost items are not eligible, you may decide, even before the budgeting exercise, whether you want to go for the project and prepare the application, or whether you stop working on the project because you would receive just very tiny amounts for the project, and the rest you would have to pay by yourself because of a large amount of non-eligible costs. So the final question I can answer was concerning the transfers or changes in the budget once the budget is approved and the project is approved by the donor. You cannot get more money. That's a general rule. As soon as you submit the project, the total amount of money is fixed and you cannot get more money. But sometimes you can change the amounts within the budget and transfer money from the personal costs to the material costs or vice versa. And the rules for making internal changes in the budget are usually given by the call for proposals or by the general rules of the program. In the case of European external support, it is a document which is called Prague, Practical Guide for Something. And it's just like this set of rules describing all the European rules you have to stick to. And there are also general rules for transferring funds within the budget. But you should read the call for proposals carefully to make sure that you understand the rules. And sometimes the tiny amounts of budget can be transferred from one category to another category, even without the approval of the donor. But usually the changes of the budget had to be approved by the donor before you make the changes. So the process is that you decide you need to make a change in the budget, you apply to the donor, you justify the changes, explain the changes, submit new budget, then the donor decides, runs through it, may negotiate with you, and then either approves or declines approval of your changes in the budget. That's the general rule. Okay, thank you for patient listening to me. I'll try I'll try to answer some of the questions put in the chat. Okay, what I'll ask Sander, if you, Sander, can continue, or Dmitro, or who is
Yes,
now.
I think I'm next.
And I will read the questions, and either I will try to answer them myself, or I will ask Dmitro or Sander to answer them. And will you let me some time, because I'm not fluent in Ukrainian, far from it, and it will take me some time to read it or to translate it. Thank you for your patience, and please, Sander, the floor is yours.
Good. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. My name is Sander van der Molen. I'll be continuing this presentation, and I have to say thank you, Jan, for very elaborate introduction into budgeting. It was quite detailed oriented, different aspects, different elements, the challenges in the financing, the cash flow, the different cost categories, eligibility, many things are quite challenging. I'll continue. I'll try to provide some examples and some insights, so maybe a bit of repetition, but not to repeat, but more to share more experiences and examples of how the budgeting can happen also at European level, meaning when you have projects where you're not applying on your own, but also in consortia with project partners, what then additional challenges appear. May I ask, let's move to the next slide, to my own slides, because I think this was still Jan's slide. Yes. Jan has been introducing the concepts, for example, of staff costs. And what I think is important once you apply to any new grant opportunity is understanding. Typical, there are two examples. Either you can calculate your staff cost by calculating your actual costs to the organization of your staff. That means the salary costs, the taxes, social insurances, etc. All costs that are that employer has. And in some cases, some schemes have actually identified the fixed personnel cost for one full-time equivalent person per geography. This is in a minority of cases, but it's important for you to identify this if this is the case, because it will affect how you calculate budgets. And some insights in budgeting that's, I think, also relevant for participants from Ukraine. I've seen many different applications where you have different partners. For example, you have a partner from Germany and a partner from Norway, and they start calculating workloads, and they think, okay, let's have 6 months of workload for each of us. So the Norwegians get 6 months, the Germans get 6 months, and you as Ukrainian participants get 6 months because equal amount of work. What typically will happen is a Norwegian partner will fill in their cost. And guess what? In Norway, the cost for one researcher, a PhD student, so starting of his career or her career, the actual cost for 1 month employing this PhD student is 10,000 euro. A professor might be 20,000 euro. Then a German person will say, well, for us in our, let's say, municipality, our cost for one person working full-time is also 10,000 euro. Well, guess what? I'm based in Lithuania. We don't reach 10,000 euro unless very high-level directors. Definitely not in a municipality or a university or non-profit organization. And I expect the similar challenge will be in Ukraine, that the rates are much lower. So that creates a bit of the challenge. You do equal amount of work, and the Germans would get 10,000 euro for that amount of work reimbursed, and you get your actual salary that you can declare. So you need to keep in mind, how do you deal with that? Is there a possibility that you can staff more senior people on the project and say we need more senior people with a higher salary, because the actual money you'll get reimbursed is what you can actually declare. So in negotiations with other project partners, especially from Nordic or Western Europe, there are, for you to negotiate a higher budget that's in your interest, and most organizations try to see, can we get more budgets allocated that's helpful for your own organization, for your financial sustainability, how to get the higher budgets. you can try to ask for more work to be done or more responsibilities. But you can also argue that actually you need to involve your more expensive people that you can declare with the higher salaries to make sure that the gap is not too big between Nordic and Western Europe and you from Ukraine or other emerging countries and developing countries. So this is something to keep in mind. What is important is that the people you report, you should keep track of time sheets. You should be able to declare the cost. The people should be employed, and it could be a normal employment contract. And I do understand that in Ukraine, often you use also individual entrepreneurship contracts. So this is something to keep in mind, that differences can be big between different countries. Second aspect on subcontracting. This is also something quite challenging. I think that many organizations that have not much experience with grant funding, there's a challenge. Sometimes there's a direct cost category and there's a subcontracting, and not everybody understands the difference. And of course, it could be dependent per scheme, but most schemes have a clear difference between the two categories. Direct costs are typically the costs you incur while implementing an action. And this could mean you need some printing costs, you need to rent a car, you need to book a flight, you need to have a hotel, a conference room, you need to hire a projector, you need to create a roll-up. Actual costs that you as an organization incur, that you pay for other organizations or ordering goods. It could be services, it could be goods. But you're in charge of doing the activity yourself. You just need to help from a catering, help from a conference room, others external support. Subcontracting is something different. So subcontracting means we have a certain task, activity, a coherent group of activities to be done in the project. And our organizations, we don't have the capacity for this. We don't have the expertise, the availability of people. We ask on other organizations, and typically you ask it through procurements. That depends a bit on the rules locally, but also in the international projects. We ask another organization to implement these activities and take the full ownership of the activities. That is considered subcontracting. So it's important to understand what is subcontracting and what is other direct costs, external costs. And a follow-up question typically is, well, how much is fine to subcontract or have indirect cost? What's a good rate? Is 10% fine? Is 20% fine? 50% or 80%? Because maybe your own organization is quite busy and you would say, I want most of the work to be done for my project done by other organizations. So we're fine to be in the projects, but maybe we don't have the capacity, the expertise in-house ourselves. Here, typically, there are no hard rules. Very rarely in grant projects where you apply for grant funding, there are specific rules, but there are rules of thumbs, experience from project evaluators, what they expect to see. And typically they will indicate that a majority of the work should be done by the organization that is a full-fledged partner. And you need to justify why you would subcontract, maybe 10 or 20 or 30%, but preferably not more. Exceptions might be there, but could be rare. And you need to have a good justification why you want to subcontract activity. You need to justify how do you find, or have you already found an organization that will subcontract, that will do the activities on your behalf and invoice. This could be through different processes, how you identify to do this. It could be in public procurement. You could ask different organizations to make a bid for it. But you need to identify already in the project proposal stage why you subcontract certain activities, how you will choose another organization and the best organization to do this, or have you already chosen? And the recommendation is don't overdo it with the amount of subcontracting. Try to keep it, rule of thumb, around maximum 30%. And maybe you have your own preference to keep most of the project budgets in-house to do it yourself because it actually would pay the salaries of your own people, or maybe it allows you to expand your organization and hire on project basis or permanent basis more people with certain expertise. This is up to you to choose. One thing, the next point maybe, on indirect costs. This is something to really keep track of which scheme has what kind of indirect costs, because it reimburses the cost that is assumed you have for running an organization, the overhead costs of a project. And some projects might have very low indirect costs eligibility of 5%, 7%. Some might have it 20, 25, or 30%. And this is something that makes the scheme a bit more attractive. Why? Because if you report cost of people and you report other costs, the indirect cost is typically calculated as a percentage of your staff costs and your other direct costs that you will get on top as a reimbursement. Because typically they assume that you have a cost for running your organization. Your employees need a laptop, a phone, office. The office needs to be cleaned. You have certain costs of operating an organization. And therefore, instead of just reimbursing only your actual costs of salaries, actual costs of invoices paid, an assumption is made you have other overhead costs as an organization, and a certain percentage of your actual incurred and declared costs you'll get on top of your grant amount. And this could be relevant for you as an organization to understand, does it make sense to run the projects? And this is how Jan explained before. There could be different reasons why. Maybe he used example why a loan could be even more attractive than a grant because of the cash flow issues, the needed loans you need to get to bridge the cash flow. Maybe you have to only get reimbursements after a long while, and you have to pre-finance everything. Indirect cost is something that you can calculate. Does it make sense of the whole running the whole project if you have hidden costs that are not eligible? That means specific expenses of operating that are not in your standard personnel costs and other direct costs. And my own experience running an NGO, the difference between 7% or 25% can be significant in indirect costs. Most schemes don't calculate indirect costs from subcontracting. So this could be another incentive to try to limit the amount of subcontracting, because if you have costs for conference room, for flights and travel, you might get indirect costs on top of that, 7%, 10%, 25%, but not of subcontracting. So this is something to calculate when you're budgeting. What is the total amount of money you'll receive? What is the total amount of costs you will have? And what's the cost of operating? Does it make sense for you to run the projects as a total, as well as Jan explained already on the cash flow? Can you survive on the cash flow, or do you need to incur additional costs like a bank loan to bridge the problems when you are running out of cash? There's not enough pre-finance. You need to pay salaries to declare them and to get reimbursed. How to survive that? And keep in mind, the extra costs for a bank loan to be able to finance your activities are typically not eligible costs. You don't get the money reimbursed, so you pay out of your own pocket the cost of the bank loan. Co-financing. So this is also an interesting concept, because some of the grant opportunities say you will not get 100% of all eligible costs reimbursed. It might say you get 90%, 95%, 70%, 75% of all costs reimbursed. What does that mean? You might pay 10 months, 12 months salary for your employee for, let's say, I'll just use a number, €500 per month, total costs for 12 months. Afterwards, calculating the all costs, the grant authority, the ones that grants you the grant and finance you, says thank you for paying that salary, but we reimburse 70 or 75% of the costs you had. The rationale from the grant authority is that you should bring some co-financing yourself to run your costs. They assume that you have an interest as a beneficiary to run the project as well. The grant authority will give you a certain percentage of the project's costs, and they will say, well, if you really want to do the project, you have to bring some finance yourself. In most cases, in the application phase, you don't need to show that you have collected this money. You don't need to have a separate bank account. You don't need to show your financial records, typically of your organization, that you have secured the co-financing. You don't need to have letters from other organization, state organization, banks, or etc. like, hey, we pay the other amount of money. The assumption is you need to deal with your expenses, show that you can finance the projects, and you will get reimbursed for that specific percentage for the projects. So you just pay your salaries, you just spend the money you need to do in flights, transportation, conference rooms, caterings, etc. You'll all send those invoices to the grant authority, and they said instead of giving you 100% money back, they say, we'll give you 70% back. It's your problem how to deal with the cash flow and with the co-financing. And again, as Jan raised the issue, if you can't afford this, you should not do it. You should, at the planning phase, know and plan, can I maintain the project? Can I finance it? Does it make sense? Here, interestingly, even for projects with 70% co-finance, might be achievable to implement because, again, this indirect cost might be on top. So indirect costs, some cases, might get you back to 95% of total costs being reimbursed. So you need to think strategically. Does that make sense? Is the project important enough for us to apply, to hassle and deal with the co-financing? Can I afford the co-financing? Sometimes the idea is not that you need to pay 30% of the cost, but if most of your project costs are staff costs, and those people are already employed in your organization and you already have an obligation to pay them, then to get a grant project paying 70% of the costs of your personnel might make sense. Better get that 70% reimbursed than anyway have those people and pay them. So this really depends, does it make sense or not, on what would you do without the project? Would you still have the same costs or not? Will you do those activities anyway or not? Or will you only plan those activities to do if there is a grant project for the sake of the project? The last bullet point, when can I expect money to receive? I think Jan elaborated a lot. Here some example challenges, I think, are plans might not always work out. And I can tell some experience now that some projects I was in Civita dealing with as a project partner, where our coordinator has closed the project in 2023. We've done all the activities, but somehow the coordinator fails to get an agreement with the contracting authority on the financial reporting and technical reporting. They happen to forget for a full year to hand in the financial reports. Thank you, coordinator, for not doing that. That means we as a project partner planned to get our money January 2024, and now we might get it March 2025. I can't blame the contracting authority to say, well, their fault, they're not slow. Our coordinator failed to do their job in time. And of course, I can call them every day, please submit the reports, don't make mistakes. But this is something as a risk you have to keep in mind as well. You can plan, as Jan already explained, money to receive according to the grant authority legal documents. They will say, how is the grant financed? Is it a pre-finance? Sometimes 50%, sometimes 80%, sometimes 0% in advance payment. You start doing the activities. You start reporting them. And if you're a project partner, you report typically to a coordinator, the leader of the project. And the leader of the project then reports to the contracting authority. The challenge is that if that coordinator is not doing their job as they're supposed to do, and sometimes you don't know what's the capability of the coordinator, you have never worked with them, you're at risk If they fill up, if they fail to, or a project partner fails, I can now tell you example of a project closed, I think in summer 2024, an Horizon Europe project where we are a project partner, and another project partner underwent auditing by the European Commission. So the European Commission said, we're going to take a look at all your projects. How have you administrated them? How have you reported to them? And we'll take a look. Have you done a good job? This might happen to any organization. And the European Commission now said, well, we found some discrepancies and we think you need to pay back 50,000 euros. So the coordinator says, well, our project is done. We received all the money from the European Commission. But since one of the project partners needs to pay 50,000 euros back, we're not going to pay all other project partners their share of money. Because guess what? If the project partner doesn't pay the money back, somebody else has a problem. There's a gap of 50,000 euros. So we'll keep them as a coordinator, all the money in our bank account, and we'll wait till the project partner pays back 50,000 euros of non-accepted costs. And I can imagine this project partner will say, will start challenging that. No, European Commission, probably you're wrong because it's all fine and we made some mistakes in accounting. We'll collect the evidence. So again, we thought we will receive this month the money, and we've been told by the coordinator, well, probably not this month and maybe not even this quarter. You have to wait some more months. If you're a relative big organization with many projects and you have cash flow, no problem. But if you're a small organization and you were counting on the money to receive in January, and guess what, it will be 3, 4, 5 months later, that can be a big problem. And again, as Jan explained, you might have to go to a bank to get a loan to continue paying your salaries for the people that you have. So planning when you get money is possible. You can predict almost per month, and you can have consortium agreements with your coordinator, the leader of your project, when in what month you expect to be paid how much, but that's the plan. Reality might hit and we have a delay here. This report is not accepted. We were late to submit this. We have some problems in communication with that partner. We have some delay. The European Commission or the contracting authority has not come back for 4 months to us to respond to our submitted reports. All those activities and all those examples I've experienced. Project partners that disappear, projects that are put on hold, reports that are accepted, or the person responsible from the project authorities to help you and communicate with you and accept you just disappears for 4 or 5 months, not answering emails, not picking up the phone. Well, problem for the project duration, but from finance perspective, that might be a huge liability and problem you have as an organization. How do I anticipate if I expected to get money and I'll get money half a year later or sometimes 1.5 years later? So cash flow is an issue. And this is a bit of the challenge that the more you need money and the more you are eager to apply to grants, the more challenging it is to survive on the cash flow issue or possible delays. Let's go maybe to the next slide. Some other experiences. And let's not start reading the slide yet. I'll try to explain a bit later. It's not translated because I put it in as pictures. And maybe it's helpful to start understanding also the English language, because especially for projects where you apply in Europe and the EU, you typically have to apply in English. And assuming you'll be a project partner and there will be a coordinator, they will introduce to you these type of budget tables. They will use the English categories. So I'll try and explain it in English. Please ask my colleagues if you don't understand terminology, they might translate it. I'll just explain a bit on the balancing act, because I think what is important, if you're in a consortium and applying for a project, it's not only calculating your own budget, like what's my staff cost, what my other costs, what's subcontracting costs, indirect costs, and I get to the total. You have a balancing act for the whole consortium. And what do I mean with balancing acts? Balancing means an evaluator that evaluates projects will take a look at the distribution of budgets and distribution of activities per partner. for the whole project. What an evaluator would not like to see is a coordinator that says, I'll take 50 or 60% of the budgets. I'm the boss, I'm the important one, and I might give some crumbles of small budgets to other project partners. Because then an evaluator will say it's not an evenly distributed budget. It's not evenly collaborative project. It's just a project of one organization and others are getting small crumbs on top. The challenge is if you want a balanced budget, but your actual cost of one person for a month might be 10 times more expensive in Norway compared to Ukraine. Not fair, but might be the reality of life. How do you balance? How do you balance the budgets? If you say we'll give equal amount of work to Norway and to Ukraine, then the budgets will be very unbalanced. If you will say I give equal money to each, then the workload will be unbalanced. So it's difficult to say the Norwegian person gets one task to do and they get one person month, meaning the salary for 1 month for one person to work full time. But since in Ukraine people might be 10 times cheaper, might be, of course it might be not, depends on the people, organizations, etc., salary level. I'll give that Ukrainian organization 10 person months to do the same task, because then in euros they get the same. Then an evaluator will say, well, that's also uneven. If you get the same task to do, and for one they get 10 months of work and the other gets 1 person months. This creates this very difficult 2 directions balancing. You don't want a big distinction in the amount of euros between partners, because then let's say the Norwegian partner gets 50% of the budget, the Ukrainian partner gets 5%. But if the workload, the first table, you can see some example of an actual project. If the workload is not balanced for the same amount of work, well, then you get again deviation. And I've seen cases where, for example, from an emerging country, so country with relative low salaries, people would apply for a grant and they would say, okay, I still want, I don't know, university in Armenia. I'm eligible to get 1 million grants, so I'll make a budget for 1 million. And I want it mainly in salaries. And then they start putting hundreds and hundreds of people working full-time person months on the project to make sure that they get close to 1 million in salaries. But then an evaluator will think, all those people working, what are they going to do? How come for a normal project of typically a couple of 4 or 5 people working together, doing things, how come you start putting so many people and declaring so many people? And I can't see that in your application of the project, that hundreds of person months are being spent. So this is typically a push from organizations with a relative low salary level to start booking lots of people. Maybe the secretary can be booked, and maybe the junior and the assistant, and maybe we have a driver and we have a cook and we have an accountant and another accountant. Let's everybody book on the project. I understand the logic, but you have to be careful because it becomes visible that why the Ukrainian partner or the Armenian partner or the Georgian partner or Lithuanian partner have 20 people on the project, and that Norwegian partner just have a PhD student, just to get the same amount of budget in euros. So what you could do is to balance this and not only have an equal amount of work, but think about activities that could be time consuming, but where you want to get ownership or propose a larger role in the projects to make sure you consume time and you can report time of people to actually get salary reimbursed. We start getting a nice drawing. Nice. But this is something you can learn by experience, by doing. And sometimes it helps to ask other people with a bit more experience, is this fair? Is this fine? If you have a trust relationship with your coordinator, you can discuss. We assume or we want. We have plans or we have expectations. But here you have to be careful because typically there's a bit of competition in a consortium, even if you're approved in a consortium. So here we have an example of a project with, let's say, 10 partners. most cases for grant applications, there's a fixed budget per grant project to say this project can be maximum €500,000, €1,000,000, 200,000. You don't know. Well, sometimes you know, but it can be very different. And that means if each of the project partners wants to maximize their budget, it will be at the cost of a project partner. So there might be internal competition. Everybody wants to get a bigger budget. And they try to negotiate, and how they do that, trying to show their most expensive people to say, ooh, for us, our people, we need senior people. Our costs for one person month is around this. Or actually, we think scoping the amount of work, the amount of time it takes to do a work, might try to inflate it a bit above reality to say, well, we really need to secure a certain budget. Or start thinking of expanding your task to say the task you're done, well, maybe we should not do 100 interviews, maybe we should do 500 interviews to get a more statistical reliability, or let's expand and do a bigger event with more people, or let's not do it only in Ukraine, but do another event also in Brussels. So there might be different ways where you can try to get more responsibilities, get involved in more activities, and try to get more staff budgets and or also budget for other costs, more travel, more indicate if you want to do videos or make a website or do other activities. But this is a kind of dynamic that plays in consortia where experienced project partners know a bit how to play the game in trying to secure more budgets. And often that is by volunteering to take bigger responsibility in the project, be a leader somewhere in a work package or a certain type of activities, suggest new activities that are in line with your own expertise. And this is a one way where you can try to get a bigger budget for yourself. And typically, maybe if you're the first time into a project where the coordinator does not know you, it might be more difficult to claim that, hey, I want to have a big responsibility and big budgets. But typically, as the experience is, you start as a small partner, as a small project to be tested by the coordinator. And if you do a good job and they like you as a person, they like you as an organization, you've done good quality work, you've done it on time, you didn't create problems, then they might be willing to work again with you and give you a bigger role and bigger budget. So often working at international level with project partners is also an aspect of the long-term strategy. That means building credibility, building reputation, showing that you have experience in multiple projects, showing you have experience in how to do proper financial reporting, technical reporting. You can write reports, you can write activities, you have reliable people. Hopefully also not with a high turnover of people, meaning you start the project with one person, then you hand it over after half a year because the person left to another person, and then that person leaves, and then the third person will continue the project. That leaves also a typical not good impression for other projects partners. I understand that in some organizations, and I can especially mention in Ukraine, you cannot stop people from being drafted, so you cannot stop people from leaving. So you have to understand yourself and your own organization. Are we an organization where people are relatively stable? The person that says and helps in getting the projects, making the application and the budget is more likely also to implement the full duration. Then you can start building the trust at individual level as well as organizational level. It comes together. So back to the balancing acts and experiences, being located in a relative low salary country, sometimes it's hard to work with Nordic or Western European partners because they might get paid twice the amount of money, or 3 times or 4 times. They might get big budgets because their salaries are high. And it doesn't mean that they're better. They're just having in a high cost society with high salaries. So sometimes it feels unfair. We have had project partners from, let's say, Finland, where we are coordinator, and their budget was higher than for us as a coordinator. We felt that we did 5 or 10 times more work, and the project partner from Finland, in our view, could not even write good reports. We had to rewrite them. and they get a bigger budget. Well, yes, that's because of the finished salaries. Alternative is not participate in the projects and get nothing at all. So there are some things you cannot escape in this reimbursement of actual incurred costs. You can try to have a bit more experienced people, to have a bit higher salaries. Some projects or some organizations trying to deal with specific individual contracts or project-based contracts where the salaries are higher than the normal salaries as a normal employment contract. I'm not a legal expert to say what is it possible and for which grants it's eligible and is it acceptable and not. Really depends on the different schemes where it's allowed or not allowed. But it's, I would say, the game to play in building experience. And maybe as Jan already explained, it's also an assessment to make. Is it worthwhile for you as an organization to explore all the different international grant opportunities? Interreg Europe, Horizon Europe, COSME program, a Digital Europe program. There might be even many more programs. And each of those programs have their own dynamic, their own way of counting costs, their own culture of collaborating and organizations that participate. Learning how to participate takes a lot of time. And learning also the budgeting for each. What's the size of the projects? What's the size for each project partner? How are the reimbursement costs? All of this you need to learn and find out and plan, as Jan explains, because there could be lots of challenges in case you misunderstood what is eligible or misunderstood the financing. So you need to make an assessment in which programs it makes sense to invest in the knowledge and expertise to participate and where not. I want to leave some time for Dimitros, so maybe I'll stop here. Feel free to ask questions on chat and I'll ask my colleagues to help me translate, and maybe we have time at the end I can answer because or my colleagues will do. So Dimitro, over to you then.
Thank you, Sander. Так. У мене тут декілька слайдів, я бачу, їх розподілили на декілька. Окей. Да, дивіться, тут прості такі поради з досвіду. Да, тобто планування бюджету – це не просто формальна справа. Це реально підхід до того, що ви будете робити. Тому що те, що ви запланували, вам затвердять і вам потім з цим жити і працювати. Тому якби зразу варто максимально підходити до цього як до реального плану. Якщо ви знаєте, прекрасно. Якщо ні, то варто порадитися з тим, хто це виконуватиме, да, щоб вони теж були згодні працювати за цю зарплату або виконувати там послуги за ці кошти. Якщо це товари, подивитись їхню ринкову вартість, порівняти на якихось сайтах-агрегаторах такого плану. Також такий момент, що ви закладаєте, часто закладають вартість на момент подачі заявки. Але якщо тривалість розгляду довга і затверджують і виконувати вам аж там наступного року, то, можливо, варто врахувати інфляцію. Тобто закласти, от ми тут в університеті закладаємо на 10% більше, ніж на момент подачі. Можливо, якщо інфляція там в Україні, не знаю, 20%, можна закладати 20%. От. Також треба дивитися, яку суму вони пропонують на певне це оголошення гранту. Так? Тобто, часто буває так, що вони кажуть, там, ми от можемо профінансувати там 100 тисяч євро, так? Проект максимально, і ми можемо видати там 10 проєктів на 100 тисяч євро. І парадоксальним чином, от я знаю, що часто звикли ми, українці, там економити кошти. І думаємо, може податись там не на 100 тисяч, а там на 50, або там на 90. І парадоксальним чином для донора краще, якщо проект дорожчий, ніж дешевший. Тому що якщо ви подасте не на 100 тисяч, а на 90, в донора залишиться 10 тисяч, які ні туди, ні сюди. Тобто він не може профінансувати ще якийсь там 11-й проект на 10 тисяч. Тобто це не бізнес, який залишає собі залишки і на них там збільшує прибутки. Ці кошти виділені для там доброї справи. Тому якщо вони дають 100 тисяч, не знаю, там подайтесь там або на 100, або на 99, але використати це з користю. Також, чисто такий, знаєте, здоровий глузд. варто шукати баланс між різними видами витрат. Тобто, якщо ви там, не знаю, ремонтуєте, там, покращуєте школи чи дороги, це одне. Тобто, але можливо, ще треба якісь там до цього додати роботи, планування. Тобто, якщо ви, не знаю, робите веб-сайт, то можливо там запланувати ще щось. Тобто, інколи це окей, але інколи донор шукає, щоб було якесь розмаїття. Тобто не можна так, щоб весь грант йшов на зарплати. Донори цього часто не люблять. Вони хочуть, щоб були ще якісь там більш прямі витрати, наприклад, там відрядження, проведення заходів. Тоді вони розуміють, що люди не просто там вирішили собі зробити там премію чи щось такого плану, а що вони роблять щось на місцях. Часто навіть ставлять такі умови, що там 80% мають бути якісь такі прямі витрати, і перераховують, що там заходи, закупівля обладнання і лише 20% зарплати. Насправді треба думати, чи ви готові братися за це. Тобто такий теж баланс. Тобто ви зробите щось корисне, але тоді витратите власний час, власну роботу. Тобто чи готові ви йти на такі умови. І тому це треба все враховувати. Можна наступний слайд? Там, здається, були ще якісь моменти. Так, ось це останній слайд від мене. Інколи донори залишають таку графу, як інші витрати, other costs. І до цього треба ставитись обережно. Тобто, якщо ви хочете використати, тобто в ідеалі треба використати ті поля, які мають специфічне пояснення. Там зарплати, закупівля товарів та послуг, там подорожі тощо. Але якщо вони не вписуються у вас в ці типові витрати, то тоді можна йти в ці інші. Але їх обов'язково треба пояснити. Тому що для донора, якщо закладаються кошти в інше і не пояснено, це в них тоді виникає багато питань. І ви не можете тоді взагалі не затвердити заявку, якщо ви не зрозуміло, на що витрачаєте. Бо в донорі завжди є питання, чи доброчесно витрачаються кошти. Але якщо у вас є там дійсно якась потреба дуже специфічна, можливо, це арт-об'єкт, не знаю, там якийсь мистецький перформанс, то тоді треба це все пояснити. Також, зарплати мають бути реалістичні. Тобто, якщо там керівнику в 10 разів більше зарплата, ніж там його підлеглому, це теж може виглядати дивно. Тобто, окей, в керівника може бути більше, але в скільки разів, не знаю, там може в 2. Тобто, якось думати, щоб це виглядало реалістично. Звичайно, в Україні часто є такі моменти, як переговорні, бо, наприклад, там, не знаю, там в Німеччині вони можуть якісь там зарплати по якимось рівням, і там ти дивишся, вони стандартні, можна подивитись в інтернеті. В Україні складно подивитись, тому це якась така ринкова ціна, але з іншого боку і донор може подивитись ринкову ціну, скільки коштують такі-то товари і послуги або зарплати. Нефінансовий внесок або співфінансування. Це, хороша практика, якщо подумати, якщо ви дійсно витрачаєте щось зі своєї організації. Можливо, це можна якраз і задекларувати як нефінансовий внесок, in-kind contribution. Тобто, якщо, наприклад, ви по факту використовуєте власне приміщення, неоплачуваний робочий час працівників, напишіть це, тобто, якщо ви вкладаєтеся в щось більше, ніж вам дає донор, то, щоб він це цінив і бачив, але це має бути щось реальне, що дійсно ви вкладете від себе. Дуже добре спрацьовують заявки в партнерстві громадськості та влади або самоврядування. Тому що є певний такий баланс. У органів влади або місцевого самоврядування в них є повноваження на впровадження якихось там політик, змін, покращення громади. А в громадських організацій в них є набагато більше гнучкості. Тобто вони не обмежені законами про держслужбовців. Вони можуть робити якісь активності, вони можуть говорити те, що думають, в тому сенсі, що в них більше там свободи слова, свободи пересування, менше обмежень. І часом вони мають більше часу на те, щоб пройти якісь тренінги, да, кудись з'їздити. І поєднання цих сильних сторін, воно виглядає дуже добре. Тому такі заявки виглядають сильніше, але потребують, звичайно, узгодження. Тобто це має бути партнер, з яким ви дійсно щось зробите. Розумієте, відповідальність тоді на обох організаціях. Якщо там один з партнерів не зробить свою частину, то тоді весь проект під питанням. Тобто в ідеалі практика така, що перевірити, як відбувається співпраця на якихось маленьких заходах, маленьких ініціативах, якась аналітика, можливо, якісь спільні заходи. І ви бачите, ага, ці люди, вони дотримуються дедлайнів, вони відповідальні, вони дотримуються слова, вони витрачають кошти відповідально. Можливо, з ними можна йти далі на більш такі амбітні проекти. Податись на проект невеликий, 10-20 тисяч євро, так? Окей, якщо з ними співпрацювало, пішла спільна заявка, окей, можна подаватись на 100 тисяч євро. Тобто, бо завжди нові люди – це і можливість, і ризик. Так? Тому варто якраз, це дуже велика сила, якщо у вас є відповідальні люди і в команді, і партнері. От вибудовувати таку мережу партнерів – це величезна перевага. І нарешті, звичайно, радитися з донорами. Бо донори зацікавлені, щоб ви подавали коректно оформлені заявки. Да? Їм потрібні ідеї, їм потрібен вибір з дуже хороших заявок. Відповідно, якщо вони кажуть в випадку питань, пишіть нам на емейл, пишіть, да? Якщо у вас є питання. Вони вам радо дадуть відповідь, і, можливо, ви не витратите час на якісь там помилкові статті витрат або текстів. Тобто комунікація – це плюс. Написати лист, можливо, подзвонити і спитати. Це все спрацьовує. Від мене все. Дякую вам за увагу.
Дякую всім за сьогоднішню лекцію. Вона підходить до кінця, і ми плюс-мінус вписуємося в таймінг. Я б хотіла попросити, можливо, якщо у когось є питання, ви можете прямо вмикати мікрофон і питати спікерів. Також хотіла сказати, що... Давайте тоді питання.
Можна запитання? Добрий день. Я думаю, що Дмитро швидше відповість на наше питання. Ми зараз в основному подаємося на проекти українські, скажімо так. Да? І от часто по персоналу. Ті, хто буде виконувати якусь роль в проєкті, так, часто вони на роботі, і от договори ЦПХ укладати треба, бо фізичних осіб підприємців, які б надавали такі послуги, скажімо, нас в громаді немає. Як от в таких ситуаціях виходити і правильно поступати з розрахунком зарплати таким людям, які ще й на іншій роботі, наприклад, працюють, а ми їх будемо залучати по договорах ЦПХ?
А ви в якій організації? В громадській, в органах влади, самоврядування, в бізнесі? Де ви працюєте?
Я, в принципі, в громаді працюю, але через громадські організації ж подаємося на...
Окей, ви подаєтесь від громадської організації. Вам потрібні ЦПХ. Дивіться, тут якби питання в тому, яка складність робіт, так, скільки часу, наскільки це унікальна послуга. Тобто, в принципі, можна порадитись в людей, знаєте, як мережевим методом. А скільки така послуга може коштувати? В когось зі знайомих. Да? А потім вже пропонувати це цим колегам. Тобто це, розумієте, дуже такий тонкий переговорний момент. Все це відносно.
Я маю на увазі, маємо же ми право залучати тих людей, які, наприклад, працюють в громаді, скажімо, десь на повну ставку, або на інших посадах якихось так, і залучати їх по договорах ЦПХ на якийсь проміжок, щоб вони виконували...
Дивіться, тут важливий момент, вони держслужбовці чи ні? Бо якщо держслужбовці...
Ні, не держслужбовці.
То тоді вони вільніше. Якщо їм, Трудовий кодекс України, якщо він дозволяє там перевищення повного робочого часу, то ні, то так. Тобто треба перевіряти, розумієте? Якщо вони працюють повний робочий день і ще вони виконують якісь послуги вечорами і на вихідних, умовно, так? Треба перевіряти, ну, чи законодавство там дозволяє такі додаткові послуги. Я думаю, що це напевно окей, так? Тобто, напевно, варто порадитися з юристом.
Ну, виходить, що більше субота, неділя такі послуги, наскільки я це питання сама особисто, ну, для себе вивчала, так, і виходить поза робочий час. Ну,
Так, це звучить як робота в позаробочий час. Тоді, розумієте, треба подивитись, скільки годин. Можливо, я просто в Естонії, наприклад, є обмеження, що людина не може працювати понад 52 години на тиждень, так? Тобто, крім повної ставки, ще 0,3 може бути максимум. Тому треба дивитися, скільки ви годин на тиждень закладаєте на цю людину. І перевірте саме в Українському трудовому кодексі. Підстрахуйтесь.
Зрозуміло. Дякую.
Так, можливо, ще у когось є питання, можете включати мікрофон, можете писати в чат, якщо ви соромитеся. Супер. Тоді я так зрозуміла, що питань немає. Всім дуже дякую за лекцію. Ми обов'язково надішлемо і презентацію, і запис лекції в чат в Вайбері, а також і на пошту. Ще таке маленьке оголошення. Всі менторські зустрічі мають пройти протягом цього тижня. Я знаю, що частина вже пройшла минулого тижня. Всі інші менторські зустрічі будуть на цьому тижні, і також на ЖКХ і на екологію запрошення надійдуть найближчим часом, бо це єдині менторські сесії, на які ще запрошення немає. Ось, і вони надійдуть, і сама менторська зустріч буде в п'ятницю. Ще раз всім дуже дякую за лекцію. Тоді гарного всім продуктивного залишку робочого дня. До побачення.